Hey guys, it's Sophie. So I'm going to do my sort of getting to be standard weekly sort of chat with you guys about the books that I bought this week, about what I'm reading at the moment and kind of what I'm planning on reading in the near future. So I think we'll start off with the books that I bought. So I mentioned in my Women in Non-Fiction video that I'd gone on a little sort of jaunt to try and find some feminist texts, having been quite annoyed with what I sort of discovered last weekend. So I'll show you what I picked up there first, and then I'll show you sort of what I'm doing at the moment. So the first one isn't a feminist text, it's just one that seemed interesting to me, and it is Everything is Teeth by Sumner. And this is a sort of growing up story that's written by a young lady who moved from Australia to the UK, and it's about her sort of obsession with sharks and the sort of terror and fear that they sort of breed in her. It's a graphic novel, and I'll show you a page to give you an idea of the sort of art style. So like this page here, you can see how you've got the sort of cartoon style, but that the shark is pretty realistic. And similarly in the next sort of panel, you can see it's kind of the same there. And she kind of uses sharks as a metaphor for all the things that she's afraid of in her life, and the sort of looming pressures, I suppose, that she's coming up against. Just picked this one up because it sounded kind of interesting and it filled with my read harder challenges, and I did actually quite like it. I know some people had issue with expecting a bit more from it than it was, but I thought it was pretty nice as a sort of standalone read, and really quite like the mixture of the art style between the sort of much more realistic photograph sort of style of the sharks to the cartoony style of the artwork. And the first sort of feminist text is one called Why Women Need Quotas by Vicky, Pryce, and it's quite a sort of controversial one. The sort of publisher, Bite Back Publishing, calls it a polemic, so kind of an essay on a controversial topic that's bound to spark some kind of debate. Really interesting in terms of my job and my sort of interests outside of work. It's written by the woman who is one of the directors of a company called KPMG, which is a large accountancy and financial services firm. And so her idea behind this book is essentially introducing quotas to employment law to require companies to have a sort of better gender balance in their boards. So trying to get more women involved in executive roles in large organisations. I think for me it was particularly interesting because my professional interests mean that I read a fair bit about employment law and about the ways that law changes over time. And it was written not that long ago, I think it was 2014, but even still a lot of the things she's writing about in here, things like shared parental leave, things like grandparental leave, are things that have since come into legislation in the UK. So I found it quite interesting as a sort of snapshot into things that once seemed quite sort of out there, which have now been introduced. So really interesting, quite divisive book though. I'm not sure I'm on her side in terms of introducing quotas for all companies, but I do sort of understand the feeling. But I think it's quite a valuable book if you have an interest in business and feminism, or in sort of the corporate world and feminism, and economics and feminism. So it's slightly sort of different to the normal text we have. Rather than looking at the day-to-day sort of social aspects, it looks at the larger scale issues. Worth a read if you're into that kind of thing. And then the next one I picked up was another sort of feminist text of a slightly different nature, and this one is called Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman, and it's by Michele, Wallace. It's quite an old book. I think it was published first in the 70s, so a lot of the ideas are a little bit outdated, and there's been, you know, some movement on some of the issues that are spoken about in this one. It's a book that examines race and sexuality and sexism, essentially, and racism to a great extent, particularly focusing on the black community in America and the sort of ideals and values that community built up post-slavery and in the liberation movement. She speaks particularly about the impact that the sort of demasculation of the black male had on the black female, and how the gender roles that we all play in society attached to the male and female values of those we associate with. So saying how in the sort of traditionally black male sort of psyche at the time in the 1960s and 1970s, it was very important to be seen as masculine and to be seen as in control, which is understandable given the history, but that could lead to the devaluation of those sort of strengths in black women. So I'm only halfway through this one so far, I'm still reading it. It's quite an academic text. I think if it's not your kind of thing. If you prefer a chatty essay, maybe it's not the one for you. I think it wasn't until I read Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay that I really even thought about the differences between feminism, which is sort of white focused, and middle class white focused, and sort of worldwide feminism, so introducing people from all different cultures and attitudes. So I've been trying really hard to read up on those sort of matters and educate myself a little bit more, because I think the majority of the feminist reading and sort of education that I've given myself has been very white focused, and I would love to be able to explore and understand issues that affect people in different situations to myself. So I'll be sure to update you to this one when I do actually finish it, but so far I think it's interesting, if a little outdated, definitely worth reading through for some historical context. And then the last one I have is something that's a little bit different, still non-fiction, because I'm on a bit of a non-fiction kick, and that is Most Dangerous by Steve Sheniken, I think. But this is a book about Vietnam and the Vietnam War, and sort of the interaction between the US government and sort of individual parties who had sort of radical ideas about what should be done with the war in Vietnam. I haven't started this one yet, and it's not an area in which I have a great amount of knowledge, so I don't want to speak on it too much because I think it would just be silly. I don't think I know enough yet, but I would really like to update you guys on it when I finish it and when I've learnt a little bit more. All I know so far is that the guy on the cover is called Daniel Ellsberg and plays some kind of pivotal role in the war in Vietnam. In the UK, we don't really get much of an idea of American politics, despite the fact that their foreign policy influences a lot of our sort of political activities. So I think it's interesting to sort of visit those topics and see how the UK role plays in, and see how the sort of global political stage is set, following on from actions that have happened in the past. I've also briefly started out on Human Acts by Han Khan, but I'm literally just at the very beginning. I'm finding it a little bit tricky to read Black Macho and to read Human Acts at the same time. I think they're both quite heavy books and they deal with quite strong negative themes, and it's just emotionally a little bit too much. So I think I will probably have this one on the side and potentially read through some other things before I go back to this one. But what I've read so far is interesting, and I think it's going to be quite a revealing novel, but it's just not quite the right time for me to read it, I don't think. So as you can tell, I'm reading through a number of non-fiction titles at the moment and really enjoying that. I would recommend to those of you who don't read an awful lot of non-fiction to try and branch out every now and again. I tend to go through stints with normally sort of true crime related things. Politics and gender is what I'm looking at the moment, but I tend to go through phases, 1 month of the year or so, where I read almost exclusively non-fiction and then we'll go back to fiction again. So if you don't have a lot of room for non-fiction in your sort of life, in your library, whatever, just have a go. Just every now and again, just dive into one. It can enrich the fiction that you are reading and give you some knowledge that maybe you didn't have before. So I hope you're all really well, and I will see you soon in my next video. Alright, bye bye.